Hello, Helen Tobias here, a concerned Daylesford resident, walking you through the issues associated with this proposed Schedule 6 to Clause 43.02 Design and Development Overlay. I'm going to just call it DDO6 from here on in. My aim is to help you understand why the schedule needs to be abandoned and encourage councillors to move such a motion at the 16 September Council meeting. First, let's understand the DDO6 document. This is Clause 1 in the DDO6 document. The first concern is this third objective. Council may have good intent to limit further development while the waste strategy is under review. The problem, though, is that Clause 2 doesn't just limit, it prohibits development. We'll take a look at how it does that soon. Council has advised residents verbally and by email that the intent of the overlay is actually to address the EPA's requirement re a 500-metre buffer zone around the closed landfill, not the transfer station or the MRF, the closed landfill, and the risk of escape of landfill gas. There's no mention of this in the DDO6 document, so it's not transparent to residents, and those who do know about it are wondering what's changed, because Council has advised us in the past that the Shire doesn't have to comply with this EPA requirement, and the EPA also says the ruling can be varied, so it makes us worried. Are there suddenly issues with landfill gas escaping, and are we safe? And finally, is the proposed DDO6 overlay about the closed landfill or the MRF? The objectives don't mention the landfill. They also don't mention the transfer station, just the MRF. The third objective raises questions for residents like, what's Council's intention re the MRF, and is there a plan to further develop it? Noting that in Clause 2, DDO6 gives Council unrestricted development rights for the MRF. Is it the MRF only that those unrestricted rights apply to, or the transfer station as well? And lastly, it says limiting further intensity in the third objective, but in Clause 2, it prohibits all development for all residents within 500 metres. Let's take a look at Clause 2 now. This statement is a serious and major issue, with potential to lead to catastrophic financial and amenity impact on residents, because it does not specifically deal with how development will be managed on existing properties. It simply prohibits any further residential development on land that is currently designated and zoned for development. Based on our consultation with council officers and local town planners, here's what that means. This is taken from the flyer residents produced to inform other residents of the impacts. So no one will be able to construct a new house anywhere within the zone, even if their existing house is destroyed by accident. There's no exemption in the new schedule to give you a right to rebuild, which leaves you with just a block of land. Within the zone, there's no provision in the proposed schedule for you to knock down your existing house and rebuild or extend. You're just stuck with what you've got. And you'll no longer be able to subdivide. We'll talk more about subdivision on a later on in the video. But noting now that if you do want to subdivide, you won't be able to as before, and few would want to, because even if you are approved to subdivide, you won't be allowed to build on it. I hope this helps you understand why residents impacted by the proposed DDO6 are very upset, worried, and have high levels of anxiety. And just note that a local real estate agent agrees there's significant potential risk of property devaluation for residents if this is approved, and that residents should request council compulsorily purchase their properties at their current values. Another qualified town planner we consulted also advised of the compulsory purchase option. Next concern. A balcony or a private open space area for accommodation must not directly face towards or be located within 500 metres of the MRF. The first condition in this statement says must not directly face towards, but this becomes moot because the second condition says must not be located within 500 metres. So you just cannot have a balcony or a private open space. This applies to existing residential property too. There's no exemption made. And remember, 500 metres or half a kilometre away means that some of these residences are in town, like in Raglan Street. How is it possible to say to residents within 500 metres that they can't have a balcony or private open space? Residents live in a rural area for that reason. What does this achieve except unfair and unreasonable restriction on residents in the area? And this requirement also raises questions about why it's in place. What will it achieve? How does it meet the intent and the objectives? Most residents can't see the MRF from their property, so it's not an aesthetic, and it surely cannot be about escaped landfill gas. That would be illogical. It's difficult to understand this particular statement. It won't prevent landfill gases from entering a property. It actually increases development rather than limiting it, because you have to build a solid or 50% transparent fence to a minimum height of 1.5 metres with screen landscaping as well. It's development that's not appropriate in rural or low density areas. And again, it applies to existing residential property too. There's no exemption made. So if someone in town within the buffer wants to put up a fence, it has to be solid or 50% transparent with screen landscaping, including front fences, which is not in keeping with neighbourhood character. A permit is not required for buildings and works, fencing and landscaping on the Daylesford MRF. So again, no mention of transfer station. So is this just the MRF or the transfer station as well? And how can it be fair for council to have unrestricted development rights when development rights are completely removed from residents? Okay, here's the subdivision clause. A permit to subdivide land must meet the following requirements. The minimum subdivision area of land must be a minimum of 1 hectare, and new access to a lot cannot be provided via Ajax Road. So current rights to subdivide in the proposed DDO6 are now constrained by these two conditions. But this statement then makes the permit worthless, because you can't have a permit if you want to build on the subdivided land, because building on land in the proposed DDO6 area, a requirement of this schedule, is not allowed. So again, even if you get the subdivision, you cannot build on it, making your land worthless. Okay, they are the key issues associated with the DDO6 document. There are other issues that councillors need to be aware of. The planning scheme review is extensive and complex. DDO6 is just one change among many, and unfortunately the impacts have not been clearly communicated to residents. A letter addressed to the householder and a 4-page flyer covering the entire amendment cannot and does not provide the level of detail required to alert residents to such a major change. I challenge you to find the DDO6 on the DELP site. It takes quite some time. The other issue too is the current COVID-19 pandemic and not being able to view physical copies. It's undemocratic to proceed with this proposed overlay during the COVID-19 pandemic. We can't have gatherings of people to view and discuss the impacts, and the impacts have not been clearly communicated. Residents have had to take it into their own hands by mailing a flyer, and we're unable to contact owners of vacant land. So in conclusion, the proposed DDO6 cannot continue to proceed through the review process for several reasons. The current DDO6 approach affords council full development rights and removes residents' rights. The document is technically flawed and it doesn't clearly represent the intent of the council, and there's many quality issues. The proposal introduces a high risk of catastrophic financial and amenity impact on residents in the area, and in combination, the failed comms approach and the current COVID restrictions are serious barriers preventing residents from knowing about and fully understanding this overlay and its outrageous impacts. And while there is an option to request compulsory purchase of all properties in the area, clearly the cost would be prohibitive for council. Instead, the review of the waste management strategy must address EPA requirements, including site location, to guarantee the safety and amenity of residents and the delivery of affordable and effective waste management. I hope this video has been helpful in increasing your understanding of this overlay and its outrageous impacts on residents. Here are the recommendations that concerned residents impacted by DDO6 make. Firstly, it is recommended that at the 16 September Council meeting, councillors move that DDO6 is abandoned, and we have provided some draft wording that you may like to consider. Our second recommendation is that the review of the current waste management and resource recovery strategy addresses appropriate siting for transfer stations in the Shire. As evidenced by residents' responses to the proposed DDO6, there needs to be particular focus on the inappropriateness of the current location of Daylesford waste management facilities. We urge you as our representatives to take this action, abandon DDO6 and prevent it from proceeding through the planning scheme review.